In the dusty heat of Santa Fe, where dreams rust as fast as old metal, Jesse Navarro runs a motorcycle shop that's more sanctuary than business. His weathered hands hold secrets deeper than the desert itself. When billionaire tech mogul Arielle Blaine's pristine Ducati breaks down outside his humble garage, she expects nothing more than a quick repair from another mechanic, desperate for her money. Instead, she meets a man who won't touch her bike until he can hear what it's trying to say. Jesse carries the weight of a past that transformed him from celebrated sound engineer to quiet single father, teaching his 10-year-old son Leo that sometimes the most broken things make the most beautiful music. As Arielle finds herself returning not for her motorcycle, but for the man who sees through her billion-dollar armor, one question remains. What happens when two people running from their deepest wounds discover that healing begins with trust? The morning sun painted long shadows across Jesse Navarro's motorcycle shop, casting familiar patterns on the concrete floor that he'd memorized over the past 5 years. Each tool hung in its precise place, each workbench cleared and ready. Order was Jesse's salvation, routine his sanctuary. At 38, he moved through his domain with the quiet confidence of a man who had learned to find peace in solitude. "Papa, listen to this one," Leo called from the corner where he sat cross-legged, holding a weathered notebook in his lap. The 10-year-old pressed his ear against the side of an old Harley that had been waiting for parts for 3 months. His dark eyes, so much like his mother's, closed in concentration. "She's humming something sad today, like she misses the road." Jesse paused in his inventory, watching his son with a mixture of pride and concern that had become as constant as breathing. Leo had always been different, sensitive in ways that other children weren't. After Maria died, that sensitivity had become both a gift and a burden. The boy heard things others missed the way. A motorcycle engine spoke of neglect, how a guitar string whispered its tension, even how their old house sighed at night with memories. "What kind of sad?" Jesse asked, kneeling beside his son. This was their morning ritual, the way other families might discuss dreams over breakfast. Leo would arrive at the shop at 7, before school, armed with his sound journal and an eagerness to understand the world through its hidden voices. "The kind that comes from sitting still too long," Leo said, his small fingers tracing the bike's gas tank. "Like when I had to stay inside all winter with my broken leg, remember? Everything in me wanted to run, but I couldn't." Jesse's chest tightened. His son's wisdom often caught him off guard, the way children can see truth adults spend years avoiding. "Maybe we can help her remember what running feels like." The bell above the shop door chimed, and Jesse looked up to see Tom Martinez, the mailman, backing through the entrance with his usual stack of packages and bills. Tom had been delivering mail to this corner of Santa Fe for 23 years, and he treated Jesse's shop like his personal coffee break station. "Morning, Jesse, Leo." Tom set the mail on the counter and gestured toward the street. "You see that fancy machine parked out there? Ducati Panigale V4. Has to be worth more than my house." Jesse glanced through the window and felt something shift in his chest. The motorcycle gleamed like liquid fire in the morning light, its red paint so perfect it seemed to glow from within. But something was wrong with its posture, the way it leaned slightly to one side, the subtle wrongness that spoke of mechanical distress. "Papa," Leo whispered, his voice carrying that particular note that meant he was hearing something important. "It's crying." Before Jesse could respond, the shop door opened again, and a woman stepped inside. She moved with the kind of purposeful energy that spoke of boardrooms and high-stakes decisions, her tailored jeans and crisp white shirt somehow making the dusty garage feel inadequate. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and her phone was already pressed to her ear. "No, Marcus, I told you, the presentation needs to be moved to Thursday. I don't care if it inconveniences the investors. We do this right, or we don't do it at all." She ended the call with a sharp tap and looked around the shop with barely concealed impatience. This was Arielle Blaine, though Jesse didn't know it yet. What he saw was a woman who carried tension in her shoulders and moved as if the world was always 5 steps behind her expectations. She was beautiful in the way successful people often are, polished, controlled, with eyes that had learned to see everything as either an asset or an obstacle. "I need someone to look at my bike," she said without preamble. "It's making a noise, and I need it fixed today." Jesse stood slowly, dusting off his hands. He'd dealt with demanding customers before, though few arrived in motorcycles worth more than his annual income. "What kind of noise?" "A grinding sound when I shift. It started about 50 miles back." She gestured toward the window. "That's a $40,000 machine out there. I need it running properly." Leo had moved closer, his notebook clutched against his chest. He was staring at the woman with the unguarded curiosity of childhood, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. "Papa," Leo said quietly. "She sounds like the Ducati, the same kind of crying." Arielle's expression shifted, surprise replacing impatience. "Did he just say I sound like a motorcycle?" Jesse felt heat creep up his neck. Leo hears things differently. He didn't mean, "No, it's fine." For the first time since entering, Arielle seemed to actually see them rather than simply processing them as service providers. "What kind of things do you hear, Leo?" Leo looked to his father for permission before answering. Jesse nodded, and the boy took a small step forward. "Everything has a voice if you listen right. Your bike is sad because something inside is broken, but it's trying to be brave. Like when I have a stomachache, but don't want to worry, Papa." Arielle stared at the child for a long moment, something unguarded crossing her features. "That's actually pretty accurate. I've been pushing it pretty hard lately." Jesse found himself studying this unexpected customer more carefully. Beneath the polished exterior, he could see the signs he'd learned to recognize in himself, the slight tension around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the way she held herself as if relaxation might lead to collapse. She was running from something, though he suspected she'd never admit it. "I'll need to listen to it before I can tell you what's wrong," Jesse said. "Could take a while." "How long is a while?" "I have calls to make, and my assistant is expecting." "As long as it takes." Jesse's tone was gentle but firm. "I don't work on a bike until I understand what it's trying to tell me." Arielle's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with the automatic reflex of someone whose attention was always divided. "That's not how this works. You look at the bike, you diagnose the problem, you fix it, I pay you. Simple." "Papa doesn't work that way," Leo said with the matter-of-fact confidence of a child explaining water is wet. "He has to listen first. Mama used to say he could hear the stories that broken things want to tell." The mention of Maria hit Jesse like it always did, unexpected and sharp. He saw Arielle notice his reaction, her expression softening slightly. "Your wife?" she asked. "Was, 5 years ago." Jesse's voice carried the practiced neutrality he'd developed for these moments. "Car accident." The silence stretched between them, filled with the ambient sounds of the shop, the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant traffic on Cirillo's road, the soft scratch of Leo's pencil as he made a note in his journal. "I'm sorry," Arielle said, and something in her tone suggested she understood loss in her own way. Jesse nodded his thanks and moved toward the door. "Let me take a look at your bike." Outside, the desert air was already warming toward the day's heat. Jesse approached the Ducati with the reverence he brought to all machines, but especially the beautiful ones. He didn't touch it immediately, instead walking around it slowly, noting the way the morning light revealed subtle signs of stress in the paint, the microscopic wear patterns that told the story of hard riding and perhaps harder living. "Gorgeous machine," he murmured, more to himself than to Arielle, who had followed him outside. "Italian engineering at its finest, but she's been pushing herself beyond her limits. How can you possibly know that without even starting it?" Jesse knelt beside the bike, his experienced eye cataloging details that would be invisible to most people. "See how the tires are worn? Not evenly, but in a pattern that suggests aggressive acceleration and hard cornering. The exhaust pipes show heat stress beyond normal parameters, and here, he pointed to a tiny spot on the gear shifter. Metal fatigue. She's been worked hard and hasn't had time to rest." He stood and finally looked directly at Arielle. "Kind of like her owner, I'd guess." For a moment, something flickered across Arielle's face, vulnerability, perhaps, or recognition. Then her phone rang, and the moment passed. "Marcus, I told you I'd call you back. What do you mean the Seattle office is threatening to pull out?" She moved away from Jesse, her voice dropping to the urgent whisper of crisis management. Leo appeared at Jesse's elbow, having followed them outside. "She scared Papa, not of the bike being broken, but of something else, something bigger." Jesse looked down at his son, sometimes amazed by the boy's intuitive understanding of the world's emotional undercurrents. "What makes you think that?" "The way she holds her phone like a shield, and she keeps looking at the road like she's thinking about running away." Leo paused, his pencil poised over his notebook. "Should I write that down?" "Maybe keep that observation to yourself for now, my Joe." They waited while Arielle finished her call, Jesse using the time to really listen to the Ducati. He placed his hand on the fuel tank, feeling for vibrations that might speak to internal distress. The bike was indeed in pain, transmission issues, probably second gear, but also the kind of overall fatigue that came from being a faithful servant to someone who couldn't slow down. "Sorry about that," Arielle said, returning with her phone finally tucked away. "Crisis management comes with the territory." "What kind of work do you do?" Jesse asked, though he suspected he knew. Everything about her screamed technology executive, the efficiency, the constant connectivity, the way she processed problems like data points. "I run a tech company. Started it 8 years ago in my garage. Now we've got offices in 12 cities. There was pride in her voice, but also exhaustion. "We're about to launch the biggest product in our company's history, and everything that can go wrong is going wrong." "What kind of product?" "Social networking platform, designed to help people make real connections instead of just collecting digital friends." She paused, as if hearing the irony in her own words. "I know how that sounds, coming from someone who can't put her phone down for 5 minutes. Jesse smiled, the first genuine smile Arielle had seen from him. "The shoemaker's children go barefoot." "Something like that." She looked at the Ducati, then back at Jesse. "So what's your diagnosis, Dr. Motorcycle?" "She needs surgery, but not the kind you're thinking. Your transmission is stressed, but it's manageable. The real problem is that this bike has been your escape valve, and you've been asking her to carry more emotional weight than she was designed for." Arielle stared at him. "You got all that from looking at my motorcycle?" "Bikes don't lie. They show you exactly what kind of life they've been living." Jesse gestured toward the shop. "I can fix the mechanical issues in a day or two. But the other stuff that's between you and her." "The other stuff?" "Why you push so hard, why you can't sit still, why you look at that road like you're always 5 minutes away from disappearing." Jesse's voice was gentle, without judgment. "I recognize the signs because I used to live them." Leo had been quietly drawing in his notebook, but now he looked up. "Papa used to run away inside his music. After Mama died, he'd put on headphones and disappear for hours, until he learned to listen to what the sadness was trying to teach him." Jesse felt exposed, the way he always did when Leo's insights cut too close to truth. But he also felt something else, recognition, that this encounter was about more than motorcycle repair. "Your son is very wise," Arielle said quietly. "Wiser than his father, most days." Jesse looked between Leo and Arielle, sensing undercurrents he couldn't quite name. "I'll need to keep the bike for a couple of days. Can you get by without it?" Arielle's first instinct was to say no, to insist on the impossible timeline that had become her default approach to everything. But something about Jesse's calm certainty made her pause. When was the last time someone had asked her to slow down instead of speed up? "I suppose I could rent something." "Or," Leo said with the helpful enthusiasm of childhood, "you could stay and learn to listen. Papa could teach you. He taught me, and now I can hear all kinds of things." Jesse felt panic flutter in his chest. The last thing he needed was a high-powered executive disrupting the careful equilibrium of his days. But he also saw something in Arielle's expression, a longing that reminded him of himself in the months after Maria's death, when he would have given anything to learn how to be present in his own life again. "That's not necessary," he said quickly. "I'll call you when it's ready." But Arielle was looking at Leo with genuine curiosity. "What kinds of things do you hear?" "Everything. The way the coffee maker gurgles when it's happy. How the wind chimes outside Mrs. Garcia's house sound different when it's going to rain. Even how people's voices change when they're telling the truth versus when they're just saying what they think you want to hear." "And your father taught you this?" "He says Mama could do it too. That's why she fell in love with him, because he could hear the music hiding inside broken things and help it find its way out." Jessie felt the familiar ache of Maria's absence, but for the first time in years, it came with something else, recognition, that maybe, just maybe, it was time to let someone else hear the stories he and Leo shared. "Well," Arielle said, her phone buzzing insistently in her pocket but ignored for once, "maybe I could learn a thing or two about listening." 3 days passed before Arielle returned to Jessie's shop, and when she did, she brought with her the restless energy of someone unaccustomed to waiting. Jessie was bent over the Ducati's exposed transmission when he heard the familiar chime of the door, followed by the sharp click of heels on concrete. "Any progress?" she asked without preamble, though her tone was less demanding than it had been during their first encounter. Jessie straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. Maria's wedding ring caught the afternoon light as he moved, a simple gold band he'd never seriously considered removing. "Your second gear synchronizer was shot, just like I suspected, but there's more." "More what?" "Damage. The kind that doesn't show up in a casual inspection." Jessie gestured to the partially disassembled transmission laid out on his workbench, like the pieces of a complex puzzle. "You've been riding her hard, harder than she was designed for. The stress patterns tell a story." Arielle moved closer to the workbench, her business-trained mind automatically trying to process the mechanical components spread before her. "What kind of story?" "Long rides at high speeds, night riding when visibility is poor, taking corners at speeds that would make a professional racer nervous." Jessie's voice carried no judgment, only observation. "This isn't commuter damage. This is someone using speed to outrun something that can't be outrun." The accuracy of his assessment hit Arielle like a physical blow. She thought of the countless nights over the past 6 months, when sleep had eluded her, when the weight of corporate scandal and personal betrayal had driven her from her penthouse apartment to the open road. The Ducati had become her therapist, the only place where the chaos in her mind could find some semblance of order. "You don't know anything about my life," she said, but the defensive edge in her voice betrayed the truth he'd struck. "No," Jessie agreed, "but your bike knows everything about how you live it." Leo looked up from where he'd been sitting quietly in the corner, working on a school assignment at the small desk Jessie had set up for him. The boy had been observing the interaction with the intense focus he brought to all new sounds and patterns. "She's been crying in her sleep," Leo said matter-of-factly. "The bike, I mean. Even with the engine off, there's this sad humming that comes from deep inside. Like when I used to have nightmares after Mama died." Arielle turned to stare at the 10-year-old. "Motorcycles don't cry, Leo." "Everything cries," Leo replied with the simple certainty of childhood. "You just have to know how to listen. Papa taught me that metal remembers everything, every mile, every emotion, every time someone asked it to do more than it wanted to do." Jessie felt a familiar mixture of pride and concern as he watched his son. Leo's sensitivity was a gift, but it was also a burden in a world that didn't always appreciate such depth of perception. "Leo sees patterns that others miss," he explained to Arielle. "It's how he processes the world." "And what patterns do you see in me?" Arielle asked Leo directly, her voice softer now, genuinely curious. Leo tilted his head, considering. "You carry sounds with you. Not the good kind, the kind that jangle and clash like broken wind chimes. And you're afraid of quiet because that's when the broken sounds get loud enough to hear." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft tick of the wall clock. Arielle felt exposed in a way that board meetings and media interviews had never managed to achieve. This child had somehow heard truths about her that she'd spent months hiding from herself. "Your son is remarkably perceptive," she said to Jessie. "Sometimes too much so." Jessie's expression carried the weight of a parent who understood both the blessing and the curse of raising a child who felt everything so deeply. "Leo, why don't you show Miss Blaine your journal while I finish up here?" Leo brightened and retrieved his weathered notebook from the desk. "Want to see how I record the voices? Papa says it helps organize all the sounds so they don't get overwhelming." Despite herself, Arielle found herself genuinely intrigued. She followed Leo to a quiet corner of the shop where he'd created his own small workspace. The journal was filled with careful drawings and notes written in a 10-year-old's careful script. "This page is about Mrs. Garcia's wind chimes," Leo explained, pointing to a detailed sketch. "They sound different depending on the weather, the time of day, even Mrs. Garcia's mood. When she's happy, they ring in harmony. When she's worried about her grandson in Denver, they sound scattered and anxious." Arielle studied the page, amazed by the detail and sensitivity of the observations. "And you can really hear all that?" "Can't you?" Leo looked genuinely puzzled. "It's like, you know how you can tell the difference between someone laughing because they're happy versus laughing because they're nervous? It's the same thing, just with objects instead of people." "I've never thought about it that way." Leo flipped to another page, this one showing a detailed drawing of a motorcycle engine. "This is the Harley in the corner. She's been here 3 months waiting for parts, but she's not sad about it anymore. She likes the quiet time. She says she spent too many years being loud and fast, and now she's learning how to just be." Arielle looked across the shop at the motorcycle in question, seeing it with new eyes. "And what does my bike say?" Leo's expression grew more serious. "She's tired. Really, really tired. But she loves running, so she keeps going even when it hurts. She's proud of how fast she can go, but she wishes." He paused, looking uncertain. "She wishes what?" "She wishes you'd let her show you beautiful things, instead of just helping you run away from ugly ones." The words hit Arielle with unexpected force. She thought of all the rides where she'd focused solely on speed and distance, using the motorcycle as an escape mechanism rather than a way to experience the world. When was the last time she'd stopped to watch a sunset or taken a scenic route just for the pleasure of it? "Your son has a unique way of seeing things," she said to Jessie, who had been listening while continuing his work on the transmission. "He gets it from his mother," Jessie replied, his voice carrying the careful neutrality he always used when speaking of Maria. She could hear the stories in everything: old buildings, antique furniture, even people's voices when they talked about their dreams. "What kind of work did she do?" Jessie's hands stilled on the tools. This was always the difficult part, the moment when his carefully constructed defenses threatened to crumble. She was a music therapist. Worked with kids who had trauma, helping them find ways to express feelings they couldn't put into words. "And you? Leo mentioned you used to work in music too." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jessie glanced at Leo, who was watching with the patient attention of a child who'd heard pieces of this story, but never the whole truth. "Maybe it was time. I was a sound engineer, worked with some fairly well-known artists, produced a few albums that did well." Jessie's voice was measured, careful. "That's how I met Maria. She came to my studio to record some therapeutic soundscapes for her patients." "What happened? Why did you stop?" Jessie picked up a small gear from the workbench, turning it over in his hands, as if it might contain the answer to an impossible question. "After Maria died, I couldn't. The music all sounded wrong. Like trying to speak a language I'd suddenly forgotten. So I came here, bought this shop, and started listening to different kinds of sounds." "The sounds of broken things," Leo added quietly. "Yeah, the sounds of broken things." Arielle felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition of shared loss that she hadn't expected. "I'm sorry. Losing someone you love, it changes everything." Jessie looked up from the gear, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since she'd asked about his past. "You sound like you know something about that." For a moment, Arielle considered deflecting, changing the subject back to motorcycles and repair timelines. But something about the quiet acceptance in Jessie's voice, the way Leo was looking at her with patient curiosity, made her want to be honest. "My brother, 3 years ago. Car accident, just like your wife. The words came out more easily than she'd expected. He was my business partner, my best friend, the only person who could make me slow down long enough to remember why we started the company in the first place. And after he died, Jessie asked gently, I threw myself into work, built the company bigger, faster, more aggressive than David ever would have wanted. I told myself I was honoring his memory, but really, she paused, surprised by her own honesty. Really, I was just trying to make so much noise that I couldn't hear the silence he left behind. Leo had been listening with the complete attention he brought to all new emotional landscapes. That's why your bike is so tired, he said with sudden understanding. You've been asking her to carry David too. Arielle felt tears threaten for the first time in months. That's a beautiful way to put it, Leo. Jessie set down his tools and really looked at Arielle Blaine as a customer or a distraction, but as another human being carrying the weight of loss. The silence doesn't go away, he said quietly, but it changes, becomes less like absence and more like space for new things to grow. How long did that take for you? I'm still figuring it out. Jessie glanced at Leo, who was now drawing something new in his journal. But Leo helps. He hears things I've forgotten how to listen for. Like what? Hope, mostly. The sound of things healing instead of just breaking. Outside, the afternoon light was beginning to slant toward evening, painting the shop in warm gold tones. Arielle realized she'd been here for over an hour without checking her phone 1C personal record for the past 3 years. I should probably get going, she said, though she made no move toward the door. My assistant is probably wondering where I disappeared to. The bike won't be ready until tomorrow anyway, Jessie said. I want to test the transmission thoroughly before I put everything back together. And after that? Jessie considered the question, hearing layers of meaning beneath the surface. After that, she'll run like new, better than new actually. Sometimes things that have been broken and properly repaired are stronger than they were originally. Arielle nodded, understanding that they were no longer talking only about motorcycles. Thank you for taking the time to really fix it instead of just patching it up. That's not how I work. I'm beginning to understand that. As Arielle finally moved toward the door, Leo looked up from his journal. Miss Blaine, when you get your bike back, maybe you could try riding somewhere beautiful instead of just somewhere fast. I bet she'd like that. Arielle smiled the first genuine smile Jessie had seen from her. I think you're right, Leo. I think she would. After she left, Jessie and Leo worked together in comfortable silence, the familiar rhythm of shared activity settling around them like a well-worn blanket. But something had shifted in the shop's atmosphere, a change as subtle but noticeable as the difference between summer and autumn air. Papa, Leo said eventually, not looking up from his drawing. Yeah, Maijo? I think she's going to come back, not just for the bike. Jessie paused in his work, feeling a flutter of something he'd almost forgotten, anticipation mixed with fear, the emotional cocktail that comes with the possibility of meaningful change. What makes you think that? Leo finally looked up, his dark eyes serious. Because she stopped making those jangling sounds while she was here, and because you started humming again. Jessie realized with surprise that Leo was right. For the first time in 5 years, he'd been humming while he worked an old habit from his studio days that he'd thought was lost forever. The melody was something Maria used to sing, a simple tune that spoke of contentment and home. Maybe, he said carefully, not ready to admit hope, but no longer able to deny its possibility. Maybe, Leo agreed, returning to his journal with a small smile. Outside, the desert evening was settling into its familiar quiet, but inside the shop, something new was beginning to stir, fragile as the first green shoots after a long winter, but unmistakably alive. Arielle returned the next afternoon, arriving just as Jessie was closing the shop for the day. She'd spent the morning in video conferences with her leadership team, fielding crisis after crisis, but found herself checking the clock every few minutes with an anticipation she couldn't quite explain. Perfect timing, Jessie said, looking up from where he was securing the Ducati's freshly assembled transmission. Just finished the test run. She's purring like she's supposed to." The motorcycle did indeed look transformed. Where before it had carried an almost imperceptible tension in its lines, now it seemed to rest with quiet confidence, ready for whatever roads lay ahead. "That was fast," Arielle said, though she realized she felt oddly disappointed that her reason for visiting would soon be gone. "When you know what you're listening for, the bike tells you exactly what it needs." Jesse wiped his hands and gestured toward the workbench. "Want to see what the problem was?" He led her to where he'd laid out the damaged parts like evidence in a carefully constructed case. "This is your old synchronizer," he said, pointing to a small, worn gear. "See how the teeth are rounded instead of sharp? That's what was causing the grinding, but look at this." Jesse picked up another component, this one showing stress fractures barely visible to the naked eye. "This is your input shaft, microfractures from repeated high-stress shifting. Another few hundred miles of hard riding, and you would have been looking at a complete transmission rebuild." Arielle studied the parts with genuine interest. "I had no idea I was pushing it that hard. Most people don't. They think machines are just tools that either work or don't work, but they're more like—" Jesse paused, searching for the right comparison. "Like musical instruments. The harder you play them, the more they respond, but also the more they wear." "Is that what you used to do? In the music industry, I mean. Listen for when things were being pushed too hard?" Jesse felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever someone steered the conversation toward his past. But for some reason, Arielle's curiosity felt different from the usual polite inquiries, more like genuine interest than idle conversation. "Among other things," he said carefully, "sound engineering is about finding the perfect balance between all the elements. Too much of any one thing, and the whole mix falls apart." Leo appeared from the back room where he'd been working on homework, his journal tucked under his arm as always. "Papa used to have a whole room full of equipment," he announced with the casual authority of a child sharing family history. "Big boards with hundreds of buttons and screens that showed sound waves dancing around." "Leo," Jesse said with gentle warning. "What? It's true. I saw the pictures in the box under your bed." Leo turned to Arielle with the earnest expression of someone sharing a fascinating discovery. "He worked with really famous people, Grammy winners and everything." Jesse felt heat creep up his neck. The box Leo mentioned was supposed to be private, a collection of memories he'd never quite been able to throw away but couldn't bear to display. "Some people I worked with did well for themselves," he said with deliberate understatement. "Don't be modest, Papa. Mrs. Garcia showed me on her computer. You produced 3 albums that went platinum, and you won a Grammy for." "Leo." Jesse's voice carried enough firmness to stop the boy mid-sentence. "Miss Blaine isn't interested in ancient history." But Arielle was looking at Jesse with new understanding, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "You didn't just work in music, you were successful at it. Really successful." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of Jesse's reluctance to revisit a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Finally, he sighed. "Success is relative," he said. "I was good at what I did, worked with some talented artists, made some records that people seemed to like. But that life," he gestured around the shop, "it wasn't real. Not the way this is real. What makes this more real?" Jesse considered the question, his gaze moving from the restored Ducati to Leo, who was now pretending to read his homework while obviously listening to every word. "In the studio, I was always trying to create something perfect. Every note, every sound, every breath had to be exactly right. But perfection isn't real, it's just an idea. This," he gestured toward the motorcycle, "this is about taking something broken and helping it remember how to work again. That's real. But you were helping artists create their dreams. Isn't that real too? Maybe for them. But for me, it became about the technical achievement more than the music. I got so focused on making everything sound perfect that I forgot to listen to what the songs were actually trying to say." Jesse's voice carried the weight of hard-won self-knowledge. "Maria used to tell me that I was treating music like math instead of letting it be alive." Leo looked up from his homework, That's why you couldn't make music after Mama died, isn't it? Because you forgot how to let it be alive, and she was the one who reminded you. The insight hit Jesse like a physical blow. In all his years of trying to understand why Maria's death had robbed him of his ability to create, he'd never heard it expressed so simply or so accurately. "Jesus, Leo," he said quietly, "sometimes I think you understand things better than I do. It's because I listen with my heart instead of just my ears." Leo said matter-of-factly, "Mama taught me that before she died. She said Papa was really good at hearing the technical parts of sounds, but sometimes he needed help hearing the feelings." Arielle watched this exchange with growing fascination. The relationship between Jesse and Leo was unlike anything she'd encountered, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared sensitivity that seemed to transcend typical parent-child dynamics. "Your mother sounds like she was an amazing woman," she said to Leo. She was. She could make people feel better just by humming the right song at the right time. And she made Papa laugh every day, even when he was stressed about work. Leo's expression grew thoughtful. "I try to do that now, but I'm not as good at it as she was." "You're pretty good at it," Jesse said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Better than you know." Arielle felt something twist in her chest as she watched father and son navigate this moment of shared grief and love. It reminded her of the easy intimacy she'd once shared with David, the way siblings could communicate entire conversations with just a look or a gesture. "I should probably settle up and get out of your way," she said, though the words felt forced. Jesse seemed to shake himself out of his reverie. "Right. Let me get your invoice." He moved to the cluttered desk in the corner, and Arielle noticed for the first time the small details that spoke of a life carefully constructed around loss. There were no photos of Maria visible, but her presence was everywhere in the way Jesse moved through the space with practiced efficiency, in the small feminine touches that spoke of choices made by someone else. In the careful way he avoided certain corners and cabinets. "Here we go," Jesse said, returning with a handwritten invoice. The amount was significantly less than Arielle had expected for the level of work involved. "This can't be right," she said, studying the paper. "You basically rebuilt the entire transmission." "I replaced what needed replacing and fixed what could be fixed. The labor wasn't that intensive." "Jesse, this is about a quarter of what any other shop would charge for this kind of work." Jesse shrugged, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I don't do this for the money." "Then why do you do it?" The question seemed to catch Jesse off guard. He looked around the shop as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the carefully organized tools, the motorcycles in various stages of repair, the small corner where Leo did his homework each afternoon. "Because," he said finally, "when you fix something that's broken, you get to be part of its story continuing. And sometimes, if you listen carefully enough, you remember that your own story isn't over either." Leo had abandoned all pretense of doing homework and was now openly watching the adults navigate their careful dance around deeper truths. "Papa," he said with the sudden inspiration of childhood, "why don't you show Ms. Blaine the special room?" Jesse's expression shifted to something approaching panic. "Leo, I don't think." "What special room?" Arielle asked. Leo beamed with the enthusiasm of someone about to share a wonderful secret. "Papa has a room in the back where he keeps all his old music equipment. He says it's just storage, but sometimes late at night I hear him in there, and the sounds that come out are really beautiful." Jesse felt exposed, as if Leo had just announced his most private thoughts to a stranger. The room Leo mentioned was his sanctuary and his tormentor space, where he'd carefully preserved the tools of his former trade while simultaneously hiding from them. "It's nothing interesting," he said quickly, "just old equipment gathering dust." But Arielle was looking at him with the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for board meetings and strategic planning sessions. "You still make music?" "I wouldn't call it making music. More like remembering what music used to sound like." "Can I hear some?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jesse felt every instinct telling him to deflect, to change the subject, to maintain the careful boundaries he'd spent 5 years constructing. But there was something in Arielle's expression, not curiosity or professional interest, but a deeper kind of recognition, as if she understood what it meant to be afraid of your own gifts. "It's not very good," he said finally. "I'm out of practice. I'm not a music critic. I'm just someone who's curious about what happens when broken things start to heal." Leo bounced slightly in his chair, sensing the possibility of a breakthrough. "Please, Papa, you never let anyone hear your music anymore, and Miss Blaine understands about fixing broken things." Jessie looked between Leo's hopeful expression and Arielle's patient attention, feeling the weight of a decision that felt larger than the moment deserved. Maybe it was time to let someone else into the carefully guarded space where he'd been slowly rebuilding his relationship with the art that had once defined him. "Okay," he said quietly, "but just for a few minutes, and don't expect anything polished." Leo actually clapped his hands together, and even Arielle smiled with genuine pleasure. "Thank you," she said. "I have a feeling this is going to be something special." As Jessie led them toward the back room, he wondered if he was making a mistake that would shatter the fragile peace he'd built around his grief. But for the first time in years, the possibility of sharing his music with someone new felt less like exposure and more like hope. The back room was smaller than Arielle had expected, but every inch spoke of careful preservation and deliberate isolation. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon light that filtered through a single small window, illuminating a mixing board that looked like the command center of a spacecraft. Professional monitors sat silent on custom shelves, and cables were coiled with the precision of someone who understood that chaos in the physical world led to chaos in the creative process. "This is incredible," Arielle breathed, moving slowly through the space like she was touring a museum. "How long has it been since you used any of this?" Jessie stood in the doorway, his reluctance to fully enter the room evident in his posture. 5 years, give or take. I set it up when I first bought the shop, thinking maybe I'd ease back into it gradually, but it hurt too much." Leo finished with the matter-of-fact insight that had become his trademark. "Yeah," Jessie admitted, "it hurt too much." Arielle stopped in front of a framed gold record mounted on the wall, the only decoration in the otherwise functional space. She leaned closer to read the inscription, her eyebrows rising as she recognized the artist's name. "You produced Sarah Chen's breakthrough album?" "I was part of the team, yeah." Jesse's voice carried the careful neutrality he used when discussing his past successes. "Part of the team, Jessie. This album changed everything for her. It launched her into the stratosphere." Arielle turned to face him directly. "I remember reading about the recording process in Rolling Stone. They said the producer had an almost supernatural ability to capture the emotional essence of a song. That was you." Jesse felt heat creep up his neck. The Rolling Stone article had been one of the high points of his career, but reading it now felt like looking at someone else's life. "Magazine writers tend to exaggerate," he said. "Papa, show her the Grammy," Leo said with the relentless enthusiasm of a child who didn't understand adult embarrassment. "Leo, it's in the closet behind the old amplifier. You think I don't know, but I saw it when I was looking for the Christmas decorations last year." Arielle looked between father and son, beginning to understand the magnitude of what Jesse had walked away from. "You won a Grammy, and you keep it hidden in a closet? Awards don't mean much when you can't remember why you wanted them in the first place," Jesse said quietly. But Leo was already moving toward the closet, his small frame disappearing behind the amplifier. He emerged moments later, carrying a small wooden box that he handled with the reverence of someone transporting something precious. "Leo, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." Leo's voice carried an uncharacteristic firmness. "You always tell me that hiding from beautiful things doesn't make the sadness smaller. It just makes the beautiful things smaller too." The wisdom in those words, clearly learned from Jesse, himself stopped any further protest. Leo carefully opened the box to reveal a gleaming Grammy Award nestled in custom foam padding. Arielle stared at the trophy, then at Jesse, pieces of understanding clicking into place. "Best Engineered Album, Non-Classical," she read from the inscription. "For Echoes of Tomorrow by Webb." "I know that album," she said with genuine awe. I must have listened to it 1,000 times during the early days of building my company. It was like musical architecture. Every layer perfectly placed, every sound serving the emotional narrative. Jesse felt something crack open inside his chest, a recognition he'd been avoiding for 5 years. Someone was talking about his work not as a relic of the past, but as something that had actually mattered, that had touched someone's life in a meaningful way. Marcus was incredibly talented, he said carefully. The album was really about capturing his vision. But you were the one who knew how to make that vision audible, Arielle pressed. I've heard other albums Marcus recorded with different producers. They were good, but they didn't have that same presence, that sense of being inside the music instead of just listening to it. Leo had been following this exchange with the focused attention he brought to all adult conversations that revealed new aspects of his father's character. That's what Mama always said, he added quietly, that Papa didn't just record music, he helped it come alive. The mention of Maria shifted something in the room's atmosphere. Jesse moved to the mixing board for the first time since entering, his hands hovering over the controls like a pianist approaching keys he hadn't touched in years. She used to sit right there, he said, pointing to a small chair in the corner. During recording sessions, when I was working with artists who needed extra emotional support, she had this way of listening that made people feel safe enough to be vulnerable. What kind of listening? Arielle asked. Jesse's fingers found the power switch on the board, muscle memory guiding him through the startup sequence he'd performed thousands of times in his previous life. Banks of lights came alive, and the room filled with the soft hum of electronics warming up. She listened for the stories people were trying to tell, not just the words they were singing, Jesse explained. Most recording sessions are about technical perfection, hitting the right notes, staying in time, avoiding mistakes. But Maria helped artists understand that the imperfections were often where the real emotion lived. Like the crack in your voice when you're trying not to cry, Leo said with sudden understanding, or the way you breathe differently when you're happy versus when you're scared. Exactly like that. Arielle watched Jesse's hands move across the board with practiced confidence, bringing systems online that probably cost more than most people's cars. But she was also watching his face, seeing the way years of careful emotional distance were giving way to something that looked like hunger. "Will you play something?" she asked. "Something you've been working on?" Jesse hesitated, his hands stilling on the controls. "It's not finished. Probably not even good. I've been experimenting, I guess. Trying to remember what it feels like to create instead of just fixing. I'd like to hear it anyway." Jesse looked to Leo, who nodded encouragingly. "It's really beautiful, Papa, especially the part that sounds like wind chimes in a thunderstorm." With the careful movements of someone handling something fragile, Jesse began pulling up a file on the computer screen. The display showed waveforms and tracks, a complex layering of sound that spoke of hours of careful work. This is something I've been putting together over the past few months," he said, his voice uncertain. "It started as just noise, really. Me trying to capture what Leo hears when he listens to broken things, but it became something else. The first sounds that emerged from the monitors were subtle, the whisper of wind through metal, the soft complaint of old hinges, the distant rumble of motorcycles on asphalt. But underneath these mechanical voices was something else, a melody so gentle it seemed to grow from silence itself. Arielle found herself holding her breath as layers built upon each other, the sound of tools being set down with care, the soft scratch of pencil on paper, the barely audible hum of someone working alone but content. It was a sonic portrait of Jesse's world, but also something larger, a meditation on solitude, on healing, on the quiet dignity of rebuilding from broken pieces. "My God," she whispered as the piece swelled into something that felt less like music and more like memory made audible. "Jesse, this is extraordinary." But Jesse was watching Leo, whose eyes had closed in the concentrated listening pose he adopted when processing something particularly beautiful. The boy's face was serene, almost glowing with recognition and pride. It sounds like home, Leo said without opening his eyes. But not the sad kind of home we had right after Mama died. The kind of home where broken things learn to be beautiful again. Jesse felt tears threaten for the first time in months. Through his son's words, he could hear what he'd actually been creating, not just an exercise in technical skill, but a sonic representation of the life they'd built together from the ashes of their loss. "How long have you been working on this?" Arielle asked. "Since about 6 months after we moved here. It started as just therapy, I guess. A way to process all the sounds that Leo was teaching me to hear. But lately, it's become something I actually look forward to. You should share this with people, really share it, not just keep it hidden in a back room." Jesse's instinctive reaction was to deflect, to minimize, to retreat back into the safety of anonymity. But Arielle's phone chose that moment to buzz insistently in her pocket, and the contrast between the artificial urgency of the digital world and the organic beauty of what they'd just experienced was impossible to ignore. "Sorry," Arielle said, glancing at the screen with the automatic reflex that had become second nature. But instead of answering immediately, she hesitated, looking between the phone and the mixing board where Jesse's music was still playing softly. For the first time in 3 years, she made a conscious choice to let a call go to voicemail. "This is more important," she said, silencing the phone and returning her attention to Jesse. "When you make music like this, hiding it isn't just a disservice to yourself. It's a disservice to everyone who might need to hear it." "I'm not ready for that," Jesse said quickly. "This isn't about building a career or reaching an audience. It's just personal." "Maybe it doesn't have to be about a career," Arielle said thoughtfully. "Maybe it could be about connection, about sharing the healing instead of just experiencing it alone." Leo opened his eyes, looking between the adults with the patient expression of someone waiting for grown-ups to catch up to an obvious truth. "She's right, Papa. Your music makes people feel less alone. That's what Mama would want, isn't it? For you to help people feel less alone." The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Jesse had built his life around for the past 5 years. But as he looked around the room at the equipment he'd preserved but avoided, at the son who understood him better than he understood himself, at the woman who had somehow gotten him to reveal his most carefully guarded creation, he began to wonder if maybe it was time to stop hiding from the gifts that had once defined him. "I'll think about it," he said finally, which was more than he'd been willing to consider just hours before. "That's all anyone can ask," Arielle said. But her phone was buzzing again, and this time the pull of her other world was too strong to ignore. "I really should take this. Crisis management never sleeps." As she stepped outside to handle her call, Jesse began powering down the mixing board, returning the room to its usual dormant state. But something had changed. The door had been opened that couldn't quite be closed again. "She understands about fixing broken things," Leo said quietly, echoing his earlier observation. "Yeah," Jesse agreed, watching through the window as Arielle paced while talking on her phone, her free hand gesturing in the animated way of someone trying to solve problems through pure force of will. "But I'm not sure she knows how to stop breaking new ones." "Maybe that's something you could teach her," Leo suggested with the hopeful pragmatism of childhood. "Like how she's teaching you that your music should be shared instead of hidden." Jesse considered this, recognizing the truth in his son's observation. Perhaps healing wasn't always a solitary journey. Perhaps sometimes it required the courage to let other broken people help you remember what wholeness felt like. "Maybe," he said, and for the first time in years, maybe felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. 2 weeks passed before Arielle returned to the shop, and when she did, she looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. Jesse was tuning up a vintage Honda when he heard the familiar chime of the door, followed by the sound of expensive heels on concrete that had somehow become as recognizable as Leo's afternoon arrival from school. "How's she running?" Arielle asked without preamble, gesturing toward where her Ducati sat gleaming in the afternoon light. "Like a dream," Jesse replied, straightening from his work. "But I'm guessing that's not why you're here." Arielle managed a tired smile. "Am I that transparent? Your bike's been ready for pickup for 10 days, and you've driven past the shop 3 times this week without stopping. Jesse wiped his hands on his work rag, noting the tension in Arielle's shoulders, the way she held herself like someone braced for impact. "What's going on?" Before Arielle could answer, Leo appeared from behind the counter, where he'd been organizing small parts into labeled containers, a task Jesse had given him to help develop patience and attention to detail. "You look like the guitar that's been sitting in Papa's bedroom," Leo announced with his characteristic directness. "Beautiful, but covered in dust and afraid to make music." "Leo," Jesse said with gentle reproach, though he had to admit the observation was uncomfortably accurate. "It's okay," Arielle said, her voice carrying exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. "He's not wrong. I feel like I haven't made real music in years, just noise." Jesse studied her more carefully, recognizing signs he'd learned to read in his own mirror during the dark months after Maria's death. "When's the last time you took a real break? Not a business trip or a working vacation, but actual rest." Define real break. Time when you're not solving problems, managing crises, or thinking about quarterly projections. Time when you're just present. Arielle considered this with the focused attention she usually reserved for market analysis. Before David died, probably. We used to take these weekend camping trips where we'd leave all our devices in the car and just hike and talk and remember why we liked each other. And since then, stopping feels dangerous. Like if I pause for even a minute, everything I've built will fall apart. Leo had abandoned his organizing project and was now listening with the complete attention he brought to all conversations about grief and healing. "That's what Papa used to think too," he said. "After Mama died, he worked on motorcycles from when I left for school until I came home, and then he'd work more after I went to bed. Mrs. Garcia said he was trying to fix the whole world because he couldn't fix what really hurt." Jesse felt the familiar discomfort that came when Leo shared family insights with such clarity. But he also recognized an opportunity to help someone else navigate territory he knew intimately. "What Leo's trying to say, very diplomatically, is that I used to think staying busy was the same thing as healing. Turns out it was just another way of avoiding the work that actually needed to be done." "What work?" Arielle asked. Jesse gestured toward the back room where his music equipment waited in careful preservation. "Learning to sit with the silence without running away from it. Learning that grief doesn't follow productivity schedules, and learning that sometimes the most important thing you can do is absolutely nothing." Arielle's phone buzzed in her pocket, and Jesse watched her entire body tense with the conditioned response of someone whose attention was always being pulled in multiple directions. But instead of answering immediately, she looked at the phone, then at Jesse, then deliberately silenced it. "I don't know how to do nothing," she admitted. "I've been solving problems and building things since I was 12. It's who I am." "No," Leo said with the gentle firmness he'd learned from years of helping his father navigate similar confusion. "That's what you do. Who you are is still there underneath all the doing. You just have to listen for it." Jesse felt a surge of pride watching his son offer wisdom with such natural compassion. Leo's right. The person you were before you became CEO, before you lost David, before you had to prove anything to anyone, she's still there. What if she's not? Arielle's voice carried a vulnerability that Jesse suspected few people ever heard. "What if I've been performing for so long that I've forgotten what's actually real?" "Then you learn again," Jesse said simply. "That's what healing is, remembering how to be yourself without all the armor." Arielle looked around the shop with new eyes, seeing not just a place of business but a sanctuary carefully constructed around the principles Jesse was describing. The unhurried pace, the attention to detail, the way father and son moved through their shared space with unconscious rhythm, was all evidence of a life rebuilt from first principles. "How did you know," she asked, "when you were ready to stop running?" Jesse considered the question, his gaze moving to the corner where Leo was now sketching something in his journal. "I didn't decide to stop running. Leo decided for me." "What do you mean?" "About 18 months after Maria died, Leo stopped talking, just went completely silent for almost 2 weeks. Doctors couldn't find anything wrong, but he wouldn't speak to anyone, including me." Jesse's voice carried the remembered terror of those days. Finally, Mrs. Garciashi's, our neighbor, told me that maybe he was copying what he saw, that maybe he was learning silence from watching me disappear into work every day. And that's when you changed? That's when I realized that I could either teach my son how to live with loss, or I could teach him how to hide from it. But I couldn't do both. Jesse paused, remembering the moment of clarity that had changed everything. So I started talking to him, really talking. About Maria, about missing her, about being scared and sad and angry. And slowly, he started talking back. Leo looked up from his journal. Papa cried for 3 days straight. He added matter-of-factly, big, ugly crying, not the quiet kind. But after that, he started humming again when he worked. Arielle felt something twist in her chest, recognition, mixed with longing for the kind of honesty Leo was describing. I don't think I've cried since David's funeral. Not really cried. Grief doesn't run on anyone else's schedule, Jesse said gently. It comes when it comes, and fighting it just makes it last longer. They were interrupted by the appearance of an elderly woman at the shop door. Mrs. Garcia, Jesse realized, based on Leo's immediate brightening. Jesse, my Joe, I brought dinner, she announced, bustling in with the confident familiarity of someone who considered herself family. She was small and energetic, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. Leo mentioned you had a visitor, so I made extra. Mrs. Garcia, this is Arielle, Jesse said. Arielle, this is Carmen Garcia, our neighbor and Leo's unofficial grandmother. Mrs. Garcia studied Arielle with the direct appraisal of someone who'd spent 73 years learning to read people quickly and accurately. Ah, the motorcycle lady. Leo's been telling me all about you. All good things, I hope, Arielle said. He says you're learning to listen, which is the most important thing anyone can do. Mrs. Garcia set down a covered casserole dish that filled the shop with the aroma of green chile and comfort. Also, that you haven't been eating properly, which I can see is true just by looking at you. Arielle glanced at Jesse with amusement. Does she always diagnose people on sight? It's one of her many talents, Jesse confirmed. Mrs. Garcia, you didn't need to bring dinner for. Nonsense. This one looks like she lives on coffee and stress, and you two look like you could use some practice sitting still together without motorcycles to talk about. The directness of the observation made both Jesse and Arielle aware of the undercurrents they'd been carefully avoiding. There was something growing between Thema connection that went beyond customer and service provider, beyond shared grief or professional respect, but neither had been willing to name it or examine what it might mean. I should probably get going, Arielle said, though she made no move toward the door. I have a conference call with Tokyo in an hour. What time is it in Tokyo right now? Leo asked with genuine curiosity. Arielle checked her phone. About 6 in the morning. So you're making people work at 6 in the morning? The simple question carried no judgment, just childlike puzzlement at adult priorities. But it hit Arielle like a revelation. When had she become the kind of person who thought nothing of disrupting other people's lives for the sake of convenience? It's just business, she said weakly. Maybe, Mrs. Garcia said with the gentle authority of someone who'd raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. Business could wait for one evening while you remember what food tastes like when you're not eating it alone. Jesse found himself holding his breath, waiting to see which version of Arielle would respond, executive who lived by schedules and obligations, or the woman who'd chosen to silence her phone to listen to his music. For a long moment, Arielle stared at her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. Then, in a motion that felt both decisive and terrifying, she powered it off completely. You know what? She said, her voice carrying surprise at her own words. Tokyo can wait. They've been making decisions without me for the first 40 years of their existence. I think they can manage one more evening. Leo actually clapped his hands together, and Mrs. Garcia beamed with satisfaction. Jesse felt something warm and unfamiliar settle in his chest. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of trust in the possibility that some kinds of brokenness could be healed by connection rather than solitude. In that case, he said, I think I remember where we keep plates around here." As Mrs. Garcia began setting out food with the efficiency of someone who'd been managing family dinners for decades, Jesse caught Arielle's eye and saw something there he hadn't noticed before, not just exhaustion or vulnerability, but genuine happiness. The kind that came from making choices based on what felt right rather than what seemed necessary. "This is nice," she said quietly, watching Leo help Mrs. Garcia arrange napkins with the serious concentration he brought to all tasks. "Yeah," Jesse agreed, realizing that for the first time in 5 years, he was looking forward to sharing a meal with someone other than Leo. "It really is." Outside, the desert evening was settling into its familiar quiet, but inside the shop, something new was beginning, fragile and precious, as the first notes of a song that doesn't yet know what it wants to become. The dinner around Jesse's small table felt like stepping into a different world, one where conversations meandered instead of racing toward conclusions, where silence was comfortable rather than demanding to be filled, where the simple act of sharing food carried weight beyond nutrition. Arielle found herself noticing details she'd trained herself to overlook. The way Leo carefully arranged his green beans in order of size before eating them, the gentle rhythm of Mrs. Garcia's stories about neighborhood gossip, the careful way Jesse listened to everyone with the same attention he brought to motorcycle engines. "This is incredible," Arielle said, taking another bite of Mrs. Garcia's enchiladas. "What's your secret?" "Time, Mrs. Garcia replied with the satisfaction of someone who understood that the best things couldn't be rushed, and paying attention to what the food wants to become, instead of what you think it should be. Leo looked up from his methodical bean consumption. "That sounds like what Papa says about fixing motorcycles." "Or making music," Jesse added, surprising himself by volunteering the comparison. Arielle caught the reference and smiled. "Is there anything in your life that isn't about listening?" "Not really," Jesse admitted. "Once you start hearing what things are actually saying instead of what you expect them to say, it's hard to stop." "What am I saying right now?" Arielle asked, then immediately looked embarrassed by her own question. But Leo had already tilted his head in his characteristic listening pose. "You're saying that you're scared of how good this feels?" he announced with matter-of-fact precision. "Because good feelings mean you might have to admit that the way you've been living isn't making you happy." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft clink of silverware against plates. Arielle stared at the 10-year-old, who had just articulated something she'd been avoiding for months. "Jesus, Leo," she said quietly, "do you always see through people that completely?" "Only when they're ready to be seen through," Leo replied, returning to his beans, as if he hadn't just delivered a profound insight about human nature. Mrs. Garcia patted Arielle's hand with the gentle authority of someone who'd spent decades helping people navigate difficult truths. "That boy has a gift for hearing what people need to say, even when they don't know they need to say it." "Where does that come from?" Arielle asked Jesse. Jesse considered the question, his gaze moving to the framed photo of Maria that sat on the kitchen counter, the only picture of her he kept in plain sight. "Maria always said that losing someone you love doesn't just take away what was. It also opens up spaces for things that couldn't exist before." Leo's sensitivity, "I think it grew into the space that her death created." "That's a beautiful way to think about loss," Arielle said. "It took me a long time to see it that way. For the first couple of years, I was so focused on what we'd lost that I couldn't see what Leo was becoming. He was developing this incredible ability to understand emotional landscapes, but I was too busy grieving to appreciate it." "What changed?" Jesse smiled, looking at his son with undisguised pride. "He started using it to take care of me. I'd be having a bad day, missing Maria so much I could barely function, and Leo would quietly do things that helped. Play certain music, suggest we visit specific places, even just sit with me in particular ways. It took me months to realize he was reading my emotional needs and responding to them." "That's a lot of responsibility for a little kid," Arielle observed. "Too much," Jesse agreed, "which is why I had to learn to take care of myself better, so he could just be a kid instead of being my emotional caretaker." Leo had been following this conversation with the patient attention he brought to all discussions about family dynamics. "I didn't mind taking care of Papa," he said, "but it's more fun now that he takes care of himself too." Mrs. Garcia laughed, the sound warm and infectious, out of the mouths of babes. "Jesse learned what took my late husband 40 years to figure out, that being loved doesn't mean making other people responsible for your happiness." Arielle felt something shift uncomfortably in her chest. "I think I might be guilty of the opposite problem. I've gotten so used to being responsible for everyone else's success that I've forgotten how to let anyone take care of me." "When's the last time someone cooked for you?" Mrs. Garcia asked. "Like this? With no agenda or business purpose?" Arielle thought about it. "Probably David. He used to make these elaborate Sunday brunches where we'd plan out the week's strategy sessions. But even those were really work meetings disguised as meals." "That doesn't count," Leo announced. "Cooking for someone means making food that helps them feel better, not food that helps them work better." "How do you know the difference?" Arielle asked. Leo considered this with the seriousness he brought to all philosophical questions. "Work food tastes like it's in a hurry. Comfort food tastes like someone wants you to stay a while." Jesse marveled at his son's ability to distill complex emotional concepts into simple, clear observations. "What does Mrs. Garcia's food taste like?" "Like home," Leo said immediately. "The good kind of home where people laugh during dinner and nobody checks their phone while they're eating." Arielle glanced reflexively toward her purse, where her silenced phone waited like a patient pet. The gesture didn't escape Mrs. Garcia's notice. "How many people are you responsible for?" Mrs. Garcia asked. "In my company, about 800 employees across 12 offices. But really, I feel responsible for everyone: investors, customers, partners, vendors." Arielle paused, hearing herself describe a burden that would crush most people. "It sounds insane when I say it out loud." "It sounds lonely," Jesse said quietly. The word hit Arielle like a physical blow. Lonely. She'd gotten so good at staying busy, at being needed, at solving problems, that she'd forgotten the difference between being surrounded by people and actually connecting with them. "I don't know how to not be responsible," she admitted. "Even tonight, knowing my phone is off, I keep thinking about all the decisions that aren't getting made, all the problems that aren't getting solved." "What's the worst thing that could happen?" Leo asked with genuine curiosity. "People could make mistakes. Projects could get delayed. We could lose clients, revenue, market position." Arielle realized she was reciting fears she'd never actually examined. I guess I'm afraid that if I'm not constantly vigilant, everything I've built will disappear." Mrs. Garcia made a soft sound of understanding. "Mija, you're trying to control things that can't be controlled. It's like holding water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips away. But how do you know when to let go and when to hold on?" Jesse had been quiet during this exchange, but now he leaned forward slightly. "Maybe the question isn't when to let go. Maybe it's learning to hold things lightly enough that they can grow." "What do you mean?" "Like raising Leo. I could try to control every aspect of his life, protect him from every possible hurt, make all his decisions for him, but that wouldn't help him become who he's supposed to be. Instead, I try to give him roots and wings, enough security to explore, enough freedom to make mistakes." "Your company is different from a child," Arielle pointed out. "Is it?" Jesse asked. "You started it, you nurtured it, you helped it grow. But at some point, doesn't it need to be strong enough to survive without constant intervention?" Arielle considered this, thinking about the talented people she'd hired, the systems she'd built, the culture she'd tried to create. I suppose I have been treating it like it's still a startup that could fail at any moment, even though it's been profitable for 6 years." "Fear has a way of preserving itself," Mrs. Garcia observed, "even when the original danger is long past." Leo had finished his dinner and was now drawing in his journal, but Arielle could tell he was still listening to every word. "What are you drawing, Leo?" "The sounds this conversation is making," he said, holding up a page covered with flowing lines and gentle curves. It started out all jagged and sharp, like broken glass, but now it looks more like water finding its way around rocks. Jesse looked at his son's drawing with amazement. That's exactly what this feels like. Conversations have shapes? Arielle asked. Everything has shapes if you pay attention, Leo explained. Angry words make spiky patterns, sad words make droopy ones, happy words make circles and spirals, and honest words make lines that connect things that seemed separate before. Arielle studied the drawing, seeing in its abstract patterns something that looked remarkably like the emotional journey of the evening. You're going to be an artist someday, aren't you? Maybe. Or maybe I'll help people like Papa does, just with different tools. Leo looked thoughtful. Papa fixes things that are broken on the outside. I want to help fix things that are broken on the inside. Like what? Like when people forget how to be happy, or when they're so scared of losing things that they can't enjoy having them. Leo looked directly at Arielle. Or when they work so hard to deserve love that they forget they already deserve it just for being alive. The insight was so gentle and so devastating that Arielle felt tears threaten for the first time in months. This child had somehow seen through to the core of her deepest fear that she was only valuable for what she could produce, that love and acceptance had to be earned through achievement and usefulness. "How did you get so wise?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Mama taught me that everyone is carrying something heavy," Leo said simply. "And Papa taught me that the best way to help is just to see them clearly and let them know they're not alone." Jesse felt his chest tighten with pride and grief in equal measure. Maria would have loved this moment watching their son offer comfort with such natural grace, seeing how her influence continued to shape the man Leo was becoming. "She would be so proud of you," he said quietly. "She would be proud of you too, Papa, for learning how to be happy again without forgetting how to miss her." Mrs. Garcia reached over and squeezed Jesse's hand. "That's the secret, mijo. Grief and joy don't cancel each other out. They learn to live side by side." As the evening settled around them, Arielle realized she was experiencing something she'd almost forgotten. Existed contentment without accomplishment, connection without agenda, presence without productivity. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. "Thank you," she said, looking around the table at these three people who had somehow become important to her without her noticing. "For this, for helping me remember what it feels like to just be." "You're welcome here any time," Jesse said, and something in his voice suggested the invitation meant more than simple politeness. "Even when I'm not having motorcycle emergencies?" "Especially then," Leo said, with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a new friend. "Papa needs more practice talking to grown-ups who aren't Mrs. Garcia or customers." "Leo," Jesse said with embarrassment, "it's true. You're much better at conversation when you're not worried about saying the wrong thing." Leo turned to Arielle with matter-of-fact directness. "He likes you. I can tell because he hums different songs when he's working after you've been here." Jesse felt heat creep up his neck, but Arielle was smiling with genuine warmth. "I like him too," she said, meeting Jesse's eyes across the table. "And I like the songs he hums." In that moment, surrounded by the gentle chaos of shared dinner and honest conversation, both adults recognized that something was shifting between them, something that had nothing to do with motorcycles or music or business crises, and everything to do with the simple, terrifying possibility of letting someone else matter. The discovery happened by accident, the way most life-changing revelations do. Leo was helping Jesse reorganize the storage room when a box fell from a high shelf, spilling its contents across the concrete floor like scattered memories, suddenly demanding attention. Among the papers and photographs was a small wooden plaque that caught the afternoon light streaming through the dusty window. "Papa, what's this?" Leo asked, picking up the award with the careful reverence he reserved for things that felt important. Jesse looked up from the motorcycle part he'd been cataloguing and felt his stomach drop. The Grammy awardee's Grammy award lay in his son's small hands like a secret that had finally tired of being kept. "It's nothing, Mijo, just an old award from work." But Leo was already reading the inscription aloud, his voice growing more amazed with each word. Grammy Award for Best Engineered Album, Non-Classical, presented to Jesse Navarro for Echoes of Tomorrow by Webb. Leo looked up, his eyes wide with understanding. Papa, this is a Grammy, like a real Grammy. Leo, put that back in the box. But Papa, this is amazing. You won a Grammy and you never told me? Leo's voice carried hurt along with wonder. This is like the biggest award you can get for music, isn't it? Jesse felt the familiar panic that came whenever his past threatened to intrude on the carefully constructed simplicity of his present life. It was a long time ago. It doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. It means you're famous. It means nothing, Jesse said with more force than he'd intended. Leo, please, just put it away. But Leo was staring at the award with the focused attention he brought to all new information that changed his understanding of the world. This is why you knew so much about fixing sounds, isn't it? And why your music room has all that expensive equipment, and why sometimes when people come to the shop, they look at you like they almost recognize you but can't remember where from. Jesse realized with growing dread that his son was connecting dots he'd hoped would remain forever scattered. Leo, Papa, what's Webb like? Is he as cool in person as he is in his music videos? Did you really work with all those famous people Mrs. Garcia talks about on the news? Before Jesse could figure out how to redirect this conversation away from dangerous territory, the shop bell chimed. Jesse looked up to see Arielle entering, and his heart sank further. The last thing he needed was for her to witness his son, discovering the magnitude of what he'd walked away from. "Hey, you two," Arielle called, her voice bright with the easy familiarity that had developed over the past few weeks. "I brought coffee from that place Leo mentioned. The one with the good." She stopped mid-sentence, noticing the tension in the room and the way Jesse was standing frozen by the fallen box. "Is everything okay?" Leo, with the innocent enthusiasm of childhood and no understanding of adult complications, immediately brightened. "Arielle, look what I found." He held up the Grammy like a trophy. "Papa won a Grammy, he's famous." Jesse watched Arielle's expression shift from curiosity to recognition to something approaching awe. She moved closer, staring at the award in Leo's hands with the focused attention she usually reserved for quarterly reports. "Jesse," she said quietly, "this is for Echoes of Tomorrow. That album changed my life. I told you I listened to it during the early days of building my company, but I never dreamed." She looked up at him with something that might have been reverence. "You're not just any sound engineer, you're Jesse Navarro. The Jesse Navarro." "I'm just a motorcycle mechanic," Jesse said firmly, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, you're not." Arielle's tone carried the certainty of someone who'd done her research. "You're the producer who revolutionized emotional engineering in popular music. You worked with Sarah Chen, Webb, the Midnight Collective, some of the most influential artists of the past decade. Rolling Stone called you the man who taught machines to feel." Leo was bouncing slightly on his toes, thrilled to learn that his father was apparently much more important than he'd ever realized. "Papa, why didn't you tell me any of this? Why did you hide it?" Jesse felt cornered, exposed in a way he hadn't experienced since the dark days immediately following Maria's death. All the careful boundaries he'd constructed were crumbling, and he could see his quiet life disappearing under the weight of a reputation he'd spent 5 years trying to escape. "Because," he said, his voice tight with old pain, "that person doesn't exist anymore. That life is gone." "But Papa," Leo said with the relentless logic of childhood, "you're still you. You didn't become a different person just because Mama died." "Didn't I?" Jesse asked, more to himself than to his son. "The person who made those albums, who worked with those artists, she believed in things I can't believe in anymore. He thought music could save the world, that the right combination of sounds could heal anything, fix anyone. He was naive and optimistic, and so goddamn sure that talent and hard work were enough." Arielle was watching this revelation unfold with growing understanding. What happened to change that? Jesse looked at the Grammy in Leo's hands, remembering the night he'd won it, the excitement, the validation, the certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be in life. It had been 6 months before Maria's accident. "I was in the studio the night she died," he said quietly, "working on an album that was supposed to be my masterpiece. She called around 10, said she was driving home from her late session with a patient. I was in the middle of a complex mix, and his voice broke slightly. I told her I'd call her back. The silence in the shop was complete, except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft tick of the wall clock. Leo had stopped bouncing, his expression growing serious as he began to understand the weight of what his father was sharing. "She never made it home," Jesse continued. "Drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly, they said. And the last thing I ever said to her was that I was too busy to talk." Arielle felt tears threaten as the pieces of Jesse's story clicked into place. "So you walked away from music?" "Music didn't save her. All my talent, all my success, all my understanding of sound and emotion, none of it mattered when it actually counted. I couldn't even be present for a 5-minute phone call with the woman I loved." Leo had set the Grammy down carefully and moved to stand beside his father. "Papa, that's not your fault." "Isn't it? If I'd talked to her, she might have left 5 minutes later. She might have missed that intersection, avoided that drunk driver. 5 minutes could have changed everything. Or she might have left 5 minutes earlier and been in even more danger," Arielle said gently. "You can't know. You can't control timing and chance and other people's choices." "I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But knowing something and feeling it are different things." Jesse looked around the shop that had become his refuge. "This place, this work, it's honest. When something's broken, I can fix it. When I do good work, I can see the results. It's simple and real, and no one gets hurt if I make a mistake." Leo was looking at his father with the patient expression he wore when processing complex adult emotions. "But Papa, you do still make music, in the back room, and it's beautiful music. Music that helps people feel less alone. That's different. That's just therapy. It's not the same as what I used to do." "Why isn't it the same?" Arielle asked. "Because it's not commercial? Because you're not trying to impress anyone? That doesn't make it less valuable." Jesse felt frustrated by their inability to understand what felt obvious to him. Because the person who made those albums believed he could change the world through music. That person was wrong. Music doesn't save anyone. "Doesn't it?" Leo asked quietly. "What about when I have nightmares and you hum Mama's lullabies until I fall asleep? What about when Mrs. Garcia gets sad about her grandson in Denver and you play that guitar song that makes her smile? What about when you were really sad last month and making music in the back room helped you feel better?" Each example hit Jesse like a small revelation. He'd been so focused on the grand failure of music to prevent tragedy that he'd missed all the small ways it continued to heal and comfort and connect. "That's just," he started, then stopped, realizing he didn't have a good argument. "That's just what music is supposed to do," Arielle finished. "Not save the world in dramatic gestures, but save individual moments, make people feel less alone, help them remember what beauty sounds like." Jesse stared at the Grammy, seeing it with new eyes. Not as a symbol of naive ambition, but as evidence of a gift he'd temporarily lost, but never actually surrendered. "I don't know if I can be that person again," he said quietly. "The person who believed in the power of music to matter." "Maybe you don't have to be that person again," Leo suggested with the wisdom that often surprised even Jesse. "Maybe you can be a new person who believes in different kinds of mattering." Arielle nodded, understanding flooding her features. "The music you played for me wasn't trying to change the world, it was just trying to capture truth. The truth of what healing sounds like, what home feels like, what it means to rebuild something beautiful from broken pieces. And that matters too," Leo added. "Maybe even more than the big dramatic kind of music, because it's real. It's about actual life instead of ideas about life." Jesse felt something shifting inside his chestnut, the dramatic transformation of a movie moment, but the quiet recognition that maybe, just maybe, His relationship with his gifts didn't have to be defined by one terrible night 5 years ago. "I'm still not ready to go back to that world," he said carefully. "The industry, the pressure, the constant demand for the next big thing." "Who says you have to?" Arielle asked. "What if there was a way to share your gifts without sacrificing the life you've built here?" "What do you mean?" Arielle's expression took on the focused intensity she brought to problem-solving, but tempered with genuine care. "What if instead of hiding from who you used to be, you found a way to integrate it with who you are now? Keep the shop, keep this life, but also let the music be part of it." Leo was nodding enthusiastically. "Like Mrs. Garcia's garden, she doesn't farm for money anymore, but she still grows the most beautiful vegetables because that's part of who she is." Jesse looked between his son and Arielle, seeing hope and possibility in their faces, where he'd trained himself to see only risk and loss. The Grammy still lay on the workbench, no longer hidden, but also no longer the source of shame he'd made it into. "I'd need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course," Arielle said. "But Jesse, that person who won this award, he wasn't wrong about music mattering. He just didn't understand all the different ways it could matter." As Jesse carefully placed the Grammy back in its box, not hiding it this time, but treating it with the respect it deserved, he realized that maybe the question wasn't whether he could return to who he used to be. Maybe the question was whether he was brave enough to discover who he could become. 3 days passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Jesse went through the motions of his daily routine, opening the shop, working on motorcycles, sharing lunch with Leo, but everything felt different now that his secret was out. The Grammy had been returned to its box, but its presence seemed to fill the shop like a song played just below the threshold of hearing. Arielle hadn't returned since the revelation, and Jesse found himself listening for the sound of her motorcycle with an anticipation that surprised him. Leo, meanwhile, had become uncharacteristically quiet, spending long periods sketching in his journal with an intensity that suggested he was processing something important. On Thursday afternoon, while Jesse was rebuilding the carburetor on a vintage Triumph, Leo finally broke his contemplative silence. "Papa, I've been thinking about what you said, about music not saving Mama." Jesse's hands stilled on the carburetor. "Leo, we don't need to talk about this anymore." "Yes, we do." Leo's voice carried an unusual firmness. "Because I think you're wrong, and I think it's making you sad in ways you don't even realize." Jesse set down his tools and gave his son his full attention. "What do you mean?" Leo consulted his journal, turning to a page covered with careful notes and drawings. "I've been writing down all the times music did save things, and there are a lot more than you think." "Leo, just listen, please." Leo's tone was so serious that Jesse found himself nodding. "Music saved me when I couldn't sleep after Mama died. Music saved Mrs. Garcia when her husband had his heart attack and she needed something to hold on to. Music saved you when you were so sad you couldn't eat. And the only thing that helped was sitting in the back room making sounds that matched how you felt inside." Jesse felt something twist in his chest. "That's different. Those are small things." "No, they're not small. They're the most important things." Leo flipped to another page. "And music saved Mama too, every single day. She told me once that your lullabies were what helped her sleep when she was little and her parents were fighting. She said listening to you work taught her that broken things could still make beautiful sounds if someone cared enough to help them." The revelation hit Jesse like a physical blow. He'd never known that about Maria's childhood, had never understood that music had been a source of healing for her long before they met. "How do you know all this?" he asked quietly. "Because I asked her. Before she died, when I was really little, I used to ask her lots of questions about how she met you and why she loved you and what made her happy. She told me stories." Leo's expression grew soft with memory. "She said you didn't just make music, Papa. You made safe spaces out of sound." Jesse felt tears threaten for the first time since the Grammy discovery. "She never told me any of this." "Maybe she was saving it for when you needed to hear it." Leo closed his journal and looked directly at his father. "Music couldn't save her from that car accident. but it saved her from lots of other things, and it's been saving us ever since. Before Jesse could respond, the shop bell chimed. He looked up to see a man in an expensive suit entering someone who clearly didn't belong in a motorcycle repair shop in the outskirts of Santa Fe. The stranger moved with the purposeful energy of someone accustomed to being important, and Jesse felt an immediate sense of unease. "Jesse Navarro?" the man asked, extending a hand with practiced professionalism. "Marcus Webb. I believe you know my work." Jesse stared at the Grammy-winning artist whose breakthrough album had made both their careers. Marcus looked older than his publicity photos suggested, but his presence still carried the magnetic quality that had made him a household name. "Marcus," Jesse said, accepting the handshake with numb surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you. I've been trying to track you down for 2 years." Marcus glanced around the shop with obvious curiosity. "Nice setup you've got here. Very different from Abbey Road Studios." Leo had moved closer, recognizing the name from their earlier Grammy discussion. "You're the singer Papa won the award for," he said with the directness of childhood. "That's right, kid. Your dad and I made some pretty special music together." Marcus turned back to Jesse. "Which is why I'm here. I need him back." Jesse felt his carefully constructed defenses rising. "I'm not in the music business anymore, Marcus. I thought that was clear when I stopped returning calls 5 years ago." I know. After Maria, Marcus's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, man. She was an incredible woman. But Jesse, I've been trying to make another album for 3 years now, and nothing comes close to what we created together. I've worked with every top producer in Nashville, Los Angeles, London. They're all technically proficient, but none of them understand how to capture the emotional architecture of a song the way you do." "That was a long time ago." "Was it? Because I heard through some industry contacts that you've been creating again. Beautiful stuff, apparently. Experimental, introspective, but with that same emotional depth that made Echoes of Tomorrow special." Jesse felt a chill of realization. "Who told you that?" Marcus smiled apologetically. "Small world, music industry. Someone saw Arielle Blaine leaving your shop a few weeks ago. And when they mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to someone else, well, apparently she's been talking about your music to some very connected people." The betrayal hit Jesse like a physical blow. Arielle had shared his music with industry contacts without his permission, had violated the trust he'd placed in her by treating his private creations as networking opportunities. "She had no right," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Actually, she's been trying to protect your privacy," Marcus said quickly. "From what I understand, she's been very careful not to identify you specifically, but the descriptions of your work were compelling enough that I had to find out for myself." Leo had been listening to this exchange with growing concern. "Papa, what does this mean?" "It means," Marcus said, "that I'd like to offer your father the chance to produce my next album. Full creative control, unlimited budget, the best musicians money can hire. It would be a comeback that would re-establish him as one of the most important producers of his generation." "And all I'd have to do is leave everything I've built here," Jesse said bitterly. "Not necessarily. We could set up a studio anywhere you want. Here in Santa Fe, if that's what it takes. Jesse, this is a chance to matter again. To create something that could touch millions of people." Leo stepped closer to his father, sensing the emotional storm building beneath Jesse's controlled exterior. "Papa, you don't have to decide anything right now." But Jesse was already shaking his head. "I don't need to decide. The answer is no. I'm not interested in mattering to millions of people. I've learned to matter to the people who are actually in my life." "Think about what you're turning down," Marcus pressed. "This could set you and Leo up for life, financial security, artistic recognition, the chance to influence culture on a global scale." "I don't want to influence culture. I want to fix motorcycles and raise my son and make music for the pure joy of making it, without worrying about charts or critics or market demographics." Marcus looked genuinely puzzled. "But don't you miss it? The creative collaboration, the technical challenges, the satisfaction of knowing your work is reaching people who need it. Jesse felt Leo's hand slip into his, a small anchor in the emotional turbulence. I miss some things about it, he admitted, but I don't miss the pressure. I don't miss the politics, and I definitely don't miss feeling like my worth as a human being was measured by other people's success. Your worth was never measured that way. You were always more than just a hired gun. Maybe, but that world doesn't encourage you to remember that. It's designed to make you forget everything except the next project, the next deadline, the next opportunity to prove yourself. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying Jesse with the same intensity he probably brought to analyzing lyrics. You know, when I heard you disappeared, I assumed it was just grief. Temporary retreat until you could handle the world again. I never considered that you might have found something better. I found something real, Jesse said simply. Something that doesn't depend on other people's approval or market forces or industry trends. Something that belongs to me and Leo and no one else. But what about your gifts? Don't you have an obligation to share them? Leo looked up at his father, then at Marcus, with the patient expression he wore when adults were missing something obvious. He does share them, Leo said. Just not the way you think. He shares them with me and Mrs. Garcia and people who need their motorcycles fixed, and now with Ms. Arielle. That's still sharing. Marcus studied the boy with new interest. You're pretty wise for a kid. Papa says wisdom comes from paying attention to what's actually important instead of what people tell you should be important. Jesse felt a surge of pride watching his son navigate this complex situation with such clarity. Leo's right. I am sharing my gifts, just in ways that feel sustainable and authentic to who I am now. And who are you now? Marcus asked. Jesse looked around his shop at the motorcycles in various stages of repair, at Leo's artwork taped to the walls, at the carefully organized tools that had become extensions of his hands. I'm a father, a craftsman, someone who understands that healing happens one relationship at a time, not through mass-market distribution. Marcus nodded slowly, and Jesse could see him beginning to understand. I respect that. I don't like it, but I respect it. Thank you. But Jesse, if you ever change your mind, if you ever want to reach a larger audience without sacrificing what you've built here, call me. The offer stands. After Marcus left, taking with him the weight of roads not taken and opportunities declined, Jesse and Leo stood together in the familiar quiet of the shop. But the silence felt different, now charged with possibility and loss in equal measure. Are you sad about saying no? Leo asked. Jesse considered the question honestly. A little, not because I want that life back, but because it would have been nice to feel like I could choose it instead of being afraid of it. Maybe someday you'll feel like you can choose it. Maybe. But for now, this feels right. Leo nodded and returned to his journal, making notes about the encounter with the same careful attention he brought to all significant events. Jesse watched his son work, marveling at the way Leo processed complex emotions through his art, and realized that perhaps the most important music he'd ever helped create was the rhythm of this quiet, intentional life they'd built together. But even as he returned to work on the Triumph, Jesse couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation with Marcus had changed something fundamental. Not his decision about his career, but his understanding of what it meant to be ready for the next chapter of his life. And despite his certainty about staying in Santa Fe, he found himself wondering what would happen when Arielle returned, and whether the trust between them could survive her well-intentioned betrayal. Arielle arrived at the shop just as Jesse was closing for the day, her Ducati's engine note announcing her presence before she came into view. But something was different about her approach, hesitant, where she'd grown confident, formal, where she'd become familiar. She parked carefully and removed her helmet with the deliberate movements of someone steeling herself for a difficult conversation. Jesse, she said, as she entered the shop, her voice carrying an uncertainty that hadn't been there in weeks. I know about Marcus Webb's visit. Jesse looked up from the toolbox he'd been organizing, his expression carefully neutral. News travels fast. He called me. Wanted to know more about your music, whether I thought you might reconsider his offer. Arielle moved closer, but stopped well short of her usual comfortable distance. I told him no, that you'd found something more important than fame. Did you? Jesse's voice carried an edge that Leo, sitting quietly at his desk, had rarely heard. Like you told your industry contacts about my music in the first place. Arielle's face crumpled slightly. Jesse, I can explain. Can you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you used my trust as networking material. Jesse set down the tools he'd been holding, his hands trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. I shared something private with you, something I hadn't shown anyone except Leo, and you turned it into business intelligence. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? Because Marcus seemed to know an awful lot about music I've never released, never performed, never shared with anyone, except you. Arielle took a shaky breath, and Jesse could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I was trying to help. I know how that sounds, but... Help? You think I need help? You think what I've built here isn't enough, that I need to be rescued from my small, quiet life by people who understand real success? No, Jesse, that's not. Isn't it? Jesse's voice rose for the first time since Leo could remember. Isn't that exactly what you've been thinking? That I'm wasting my talents, hiding from my potential, that if you just connected me with the right people, I'd remember what I was supposed to be doing with my life. Leo had closed his journal and was watching the adults with the focused attention he brought to all emotional crises. He could hear the pain beneath his father's anger, could see the way both adults were struggling with feelings too big for words. Papa, he said quietly, maybe you should listen to what she's trying to say. I know what she's trying to say, Leo. She's trying to say she knows better than I do what's good for me. That's not fair, Arielle said, her own voice beginning to crack. You don't know what I was thinking, or why I did what I did. Then tell me, explain to me how sharing my private work with industry contacts without my permission was anything other than a violation of trust. Arielle was quiet for a long moment, gathering herself. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier but thick with emotion. My brother David had a song. Just one song that he wrote in college, before we started the company. He used to play it on his guitar when he thought no one was listening, and it was. It was beautiful. It was about hope and dreams, and the way technology could bring people together instead of driving them apart. Jesse felt some of his anger falter, recognizing the particular grief that came with talking about someone lost. After he died, I found a recording of it on his laptop, just him and his guitar, singing this song that captured everything he believed about making the world better, and I kept it to myself. I told myself I was protecting his privacy, honoring his memory by keeping it sacred and private. Arielle wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. But the truth is, I was scared that if I shared it, people wouldn't understand it or appreciate it the way I did. Scared that it would be criticized or commercialized or turned into something other than what David intended. What does this have to do with my music? Because I realized I was making the same mistake with you that I made with David. I was so focused on protecting something beautiful that I was denying it the chance to touch other people's lives. Arielle's voice grew stronger, more passionate. Your music, what you played for me in that back room, it's not just beautiful, Jesse. It's healing. It's exactly what the world needs right now, when everyone feels broken and alone and disconnected. So you decided for me that it should be shared. No, I decided that you should have the choice. Arielle stepped closer, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I didn't give them your name or your location or any identifying information. I just described what I'd heard, music that sounded like healing, like hope, like someone who understood what it meant to be broken and still choose to create beauty. Jesse felt his anger wavering, replaced by confusion and hurt. But why? Why risk our breven, whatever this is, for music industry gossip? Because I love you. The words hung in the air like a song played in a cathedral, simple and profound and impossible to ignore. Leo stopped pretending to read his homework, and Jesse felt the world shift around him. What? I love you, Arielle repeated, her voice stronger now. I love your gentleness and your wisdom and the way you listen to broken things until they remember how to work again. I love watching you with Leo and seeing how grief and love can exist side by side. I love that you chose healing over hiding, connection over success. Jessie stared at her, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was saying. But mostly, Arielle continued, I love your music, not because it could make you famous or wealthy or important in the eyes of the industry, but because it sounds like what home feels like when you're not running from anything anymore. Arielle, I didn't share your music to betray your trust. I shared it because I couldn't bear the thought of being the only person who got to experience that beauty. It would be like being the only person who ever got to see a sunset or hear a child laugh or watch someone they love discover they're stronger than they thought. Jessie felt tears he'd been holding back for days finally threatened to spill over. You should have asked. You're right, I should have asked. I should have trusted you to make your own decisions about your art and your life and your future. Arielle moved closer, close enough that Jessie could see the pain and hope warring in her expression. But I was scared that if I asked, you'd say no, and I couldn't stand the thought of that music staying hidden when it could help people the way it helped me. How did it help you? It taught me what healing sounds like, what it means to take broken pieces and arrange them into something beautiful instead of just throwing them away. Arielle's voice grew softer, more vulnerable. Your music helped me understand that I didn't have to choose between honoring David's memory and building a life that included joy. That grief and happiness could coexist, like harmonies that make each other more beautiful. Leo had been listening to this exchange with the patient attention he brought to all adult emotional revelations. Now he looked up from his homework with the matter-of-fact expression he wore when stating obvious truths. She's telling the truth, Papa. I can hear it in her voice, the same way I can hear when you're sad even when you're trying to hide it, or when Mrs. Garcia is worried even when she's making jokes. Jessie looked at his son, then back at Arielle, feeling the ground beneath his understanding of the situation shifting yet again. Leo, she loves your music the same way I love it. Not because it's perfect or famous or important to other people, but because it sounds like you. Leo closed his homework and gave both adults his full attention. And she loves you the way Mama loved you. I can tell because she gets the same soft sound in her voice when she talks about you that Mama used to get. The comparison to Maria hit Jessie like a revelation and a benediction simultaneously. He thought of his wife's ability to hear the stories that broken things wanted to tell, her gift for understanding when someone needed to be pushed and when they needed to be held. I don't know how to trust again, he said quietly, the admission costing him everything. After Maria died, I promised myself I'd never put someone else in a position to hurt me that deeply. And then you came along, and somehow you got past all my defenses without me even noticing. I don't want to hurt you, Jessie. I want to love you. And I want you to love me back, if you can. Even though I make mistakes and move too fast sometimes and think I know what's best for people when I should just listen. Jessie felt the last of his anger dissolving, replaced by something more complex, fear and hope and recognition, all tangled together. I do love you. That's why this hurts so much. That's why I felt so betrayed. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for making decisions about your art without including you. I'm sorry for thinking I could protect you from choices instead of trusting you to make them. And I'm sorry for loving you so much that I sometimes act like an idiot. Despite everything, Jessie found himself almost smiling. You act like an idiot because you love me. Among other reasons. Arielle stepped closer, close enough now that Jessie could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. But mostly because loving someone this much makes you want to give them the whole world, even when they're perfectly happy with the piece of it they've already chosen. Jessie reached up and touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't seem to realize had fallen. I don't want the whole world, Arielle. I just want this world. The one with you and Leo and Mrs. Garcia and motorcycles that need fixing and music that doesn't have to impress anyone. Can I be part of that world, even after I messed up? Jessie looked into her eyes and saw not the polished executive who'd first walked into his shop, but the woman who'd learned to silence her phone during dinner, who'd listened to his music with tears in her eyes, who'd somehow understood that healing happened one relationship at a time. "You already are part of it," he said quietly. "You have been since the day you asked me to listen to what your motorcycle was trying to say." The kiss happened slowly, like a song building to its inevitable crescendo. Jesse's hand was still on Arielle's face when she leaned into his touch, and the space between them seemed to shimmer with 5 years of careful walls finally coming down. When their lips met, it felt less like a first kiss and more like a homecoming, gentle, tentative, then deeper, as they remembered what it meant to let someone matter this much. Leo made a small sound that might have been approval, and they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily and staring at each other with something approaching wonder. "Well," Jesse said, his voice rougher than usual, "that was overdue," Arielle finished, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright. "I was going to say terrifying, but overdue works too." Leo had abandoned all pretense of homework and was watching them with the satisfied expression of someone who'd been waiting patiently for the adults to catch up to what he'd known for weeks. "Does this mean Arielle can come to dinner more often? Because Mrs. Garcia keeps making extra food and pretending it's an accident." Despite the emotional intensity of the moment, both adults laughed. "Yes," Jesse said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I think that's exactly what it means." "And maybe," Arielle said carefully, "it means we can figure out what comes next. Together." Jesse felt a familiar flutter of panic at the word next, the same feeling that had kept him frozen in place for 5 years. But as he looked at Arielle, really looked at her, he saw not someone trying to change him, but someone willing to be changed alongside him. "What do you think comes next?" he asked. "I don't know. I've been so busy planning and controlling and trying to force outcomes that I've forgotten how to just see what develops." Arielle glanced around the shop that had become so familiar, so precious to her. "But I know I want to be here, with you, with Leo, learning how to listen instead of just talking." "That might involve some significant life changes for you," Jesse pointed out. "Your company, your responsibilities, your entire world is built around being constantly available and in control. Maybe it's time for some of those things to change." Arielle moved to lean against the workbench, her posture more relaxed than Jesse had ever seen it. "I've been thinking about what you said, about holding things lightly enough that they can grow. What if I applied that to my company?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if instead of trying to micromanage every decision and solve every problem, I trusted the people I hired to do what I hired them to do?" Arielle's voice carried the excitement of someone discovering a new possibility. "What if I focused on vision and values instead of daily operations? What if I remembered that the point was never to build an empire, but to create something that actually helped people connect?" Leo had been listening with the focused attention he brought to all conversations about important changes. "That sounds like what Papa did when he stopped trying to fix every motorcycle perfectly and started listening to what they actually needed." "Exactly like that," Arielle said, smiling at the boy's insight. "Sometimes the best way to help something grow is to stop trying to control how it grows." Jesse felt something warm settling in his chest knot, the dramatic rush of falling in love, but the deeper satisfaction of recognizing someone whose values aligned with his own. That's a pretty radical shift for someone who's built a career on being indispensable. Maybe being indispensable was never the point. Maybe the point was being genuinely useful. Arielle paused, her expression growing thoughtful. "You know what I realized while I was driving over here, preparing for what I thought might be our last conversation?" "What?" "That I've spent 3 years building a company designed to help people make authentic connections while completely failing to make authentic connections myself. I was so busy creating platforms for other people's relationships that I forgot to invest in my own. And now I want to remember what it feels like to be present in my own life instead of just managing it." Arielle looked directly at Jesse. "I want to learn what you and Leo have learned, how to find meaning in small daily acts of care instead of grand gestures and quarterly achievements." Jessie felt tears threaten again, but this time they carried joy alongside the lingering grief that would always be part of him. "Maria would have liked you," he said quietly. "She always said the most revolutionary thing a person could do was choose love over fear, connection over control." "I want to meet her," Leo said suddenly, causing both adults to look at him in surprise. "What do you mean, Maijo?" "I mean, I want to know more about Mama than just the sad parts. I want to hear about when she was happy, when she was funny, when she was falling in love with you." Leo's expression was serious but hopeful. "And I want Arielle to know those parts too, so she understands what kind of person Mama was and why you loved her so much." Jessie felt his chest tighten with emotion. For 5 years, he'd been so focused on protecting Leo from the pain of loss that he'd inadvertently hidden most of the joy as well. "You want to hear stories about Mama?" "All the stories. The funny ones, the sweet ones, even the embarrassing ones where she did silly things because she was in love." Leo turned to Arielle. "Is that okay? Do you want to know about her too?" Arielle felt tears spill over as she recognized the profound gift being offered. "Leo, I would be honored to hear about your mama. All of it, who she was, how she loved, why she was so special to you and your papa." "Good," Leo said with satisfaction, "because I think understanding Mama is important for understanding Papa, and understanding Papa is important for loving him right." Jessie stared at his son, amazed once again by the boy's emotional intelligence. "When did you get so wise about love?" "Mama taught me. She used to say that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a practice, like playing music or fixing motorcycles, something you got better at by paying attention and caring about the details." She said that lots of times. She said loving someone meant learning their whole story, not just the parts that were easy or comfortable. She said real love was brave enough to hold space for all of someone's pieces, the beautiful ones and the broken ones. Arielle looked between father and son, understanding that she was being invited into something sacred, not just a relationship, but a family legacy of deep listening and careful love. "I want to learn that kind of love," she said quietly. "I want to love both of you the way Maria would have wanted you to be loved, completely, carefully, with attention to all the details that matter." Jessie moved closer to Arielle, taking her hands in his work-roughened ones. "That might take a while. We're both pretty complicated." "I'm not going anywhere," Arielle said simply. "I've spent enough years rushing toward the next thing. I want to stay here and build something that lasts, even if it means giving up some of the control and success you've worked so hard for. Especially then. I'm tired of being successful at things that don't matter and failing at the things that do." Arielle squeezed his hands. "Besides, I have a feeling that learning to love you and Leo properly is going to be the most important work I've ever done." Leo had retrieved his journal and was writing something with careful concentration. When he finished, he looked up with the satisfied expression of someone completing an important task. "What are you writing?" Jessie asked. "The sound this conversation made. For my collection." Leo held up the page, showing flowing lines that seemed to dance and interweave like musical notes. "It started out all sharp and jagged when you were fighting, but now it looks like harmony, like different melodies that learned how to sing together." Jessie studied his son's drawing, seeing in its abstract patterns a perfect representation of what was happening between them, not the erasure of individual voices, but their careful coordination into something larger and more beautiful than any single melody. "Is that what we're doing?" he asked Arielle. "Learning how to sing together?" "I think so," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "I think that's exactly what we're doing." Outside, the desert evening was settling into its familiar quiet, but inside the shop, something entirely new was beginning. Not the dramatic transformation of a movie ending, but the gentle, careful work of building a life together, one honest conversation at a time. And for the first time in 5 years, Jessie found himself looking forward to whatever song they might create together. 6 months later, the shop hummed with a different kind of energy. The morning light still painted familiar patterns on the concrete floor, and Jessie still moved through his domain with quiet confidence. But now there was music threading through the mechanical sounds, not from speakers, but from the man himself, humming as he worked with an ease that spoke of peace found rather than simply achieved. Arielle sat at what had become her usual spot at the small table in the corner, her laptop open but largely ignored as she watched Jesse adjust the timing on a vintage Honda. She'd kept her promise to restructure her relationship with her company, transitioning from hands-on management to strategic oversight. It had been terrifying at first, loosening her grip on daily operations, but the results spoke for themselves. Her team had flourished with increased autonomy, her stress levels had plummeted, and the company's latest product launch had been their most successful yet. "You're humming again," she observed with a smile. Jesse looked up from the carburetor he'd been fine-tuning. "Am I? I didn't notice. It's that song you and Leo wrote together. The one about broken things learning to be whole again." "Finding harmony," Jesse said, his voice carrying gentle pride. "Leo insisted on that title. Said it captured what we were all doing, not fixing what was broken, but learning how different kinds of brokenness could work together to create something beautiful." The song had emerged naturally over the past few months, a collaboration between father and son that had surprised them both with its depth and emotional resonance. It wasn't the kind of technically complex production that had defined Jesse's Grammy-winning work, but it carried something more precious, the sound of healing made audible, of family bonds that could stretch to include new members without losing their essential strength. Leo burst through the shop door with the enthusiasm of someone finishing his last day of 5th grade, his backpack bouncing and his journal clutched in his free hand. "Papa, Arielle, you have to hear what happened in music class today." "What happened, my Joe?" Jesse asked, setting down his tools to give his son his full attention. "Mrs. Peterson played our song for the whole class, and Tommy Rodriguez said it made him think about his grandpa who died last year, but in a good way. Like, it didn't make him sad, it made him remember how much his grandpa loved him, and how that love is still there, even though his grandpa isn't." Arielle felt tears threaten at the simple beauty of the story. This was what Jesse's music was meant to do, not conquer charts or win awards, but touch individual hearts in moments when they needed reminding that love persisted beyond loss. "That's wonderful, Leo," she said. "Mrs. Peterson has good taste in music. She asked if you might come to the school sometime and talk to the kids about how you make music that helps people feel better instead of just music that sounds good." Jesse felt the familiar flutter of performance anxiety, but it was gentler now, manageable in a way it hadn't been for years. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd ask, but that you're really shy about sharing your music with people you don't know yet." Leo paused, his expression growing thoughtful. "But maybe it would be okay because they're just kids, and kids are really good at listening with their hearts instead of their heads." The observation was so perfectly Leo-wise and innocent in equal measure that both adults found themselves smiling. "I'll think about it," Jesse said, and was surprised to discover he actually meant it. The idea of sharing his music still felt vulnerable, but not impossible. Not when it was about connection rather than commerce, about healing rather than achievement. Mrs. Garcia appeared in the doorway, carrying a covered dish that filled the shop with the aroma of her famous tamales. "I brought lunch," she announced with the comfortable authority of someone who'd appointed herself the family's unofficial caretaker. "And I have news." "What kind of news?" Arielle asked, closing her laptop to give Mrs. Garcia her full attention. "The kind that involves wedding planning and whether you two have finally figured out what everyone else has known for months." Jesse nearly dropped the wrench he'd been holding. "Mrs. Garcia." "Don't Mrs. Garcia me, Mijo. I've been watching you two dance around each other like teenagers at a school formal, and frankly, it's getting exhausting." She set down the tamales and fixed them both with the look that had successfully managed 5 children and 2 husbands. "You love each other. She loves you. Leo loves both of you. What exactly are you waiting for?" An engraved invitation from the universe. Leo giggled from his corner, clearly delighted by Mrs. Garcia's directness. "She's right, you know. You two get all goofy and happy whenever you're together, and you get sad when you're apart. Even I can figure out what that means." Arielle looked at Jessie, seeing her own mixture of terror and hope reflected in his expression. They'd been living in a careful present tense for months, building something beautiful but unnamed, too cautious to push toward definitions that might break the delicate balance they'd achieved. "Are we waiting for something?" she asked quietly. Jessie considered the question, thinking about the handwritten partnership agreement they'd been crafting together, not for business, but for life. They'd been calling it a friendship contract, a way to define how they wanted to support each other's dreams without losing their individual identities. But maybe it was time to acknowledge what it really was. "I think," he said carefully, "we've been waiting for the right moment, but maybe the right moment is just any moment when we're brave enough to say what's true." "And what's true?" Jessie moved closer to Arielle, taking her hands in his with the same careful attention he brought to all precious things. "What's true is that I love you. Not just the polished, successful version of you, but the version that gets overwhelmed by her phone and doesn't know how to sit still and thinks she has to earn love through achievement. I love your intelligence and your drive and your terrible habit of trying to solve everyone's problems, whether they want help or not." Arielle felt tears spill over as she recognized the completeness of being seen, flaws and strengths alike, and finding herself loved rather than judged. "And what's true for me," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "is that I love you too. I love your gentleness and your wisdom, and the way you listen to broken things until they remember how to work again. I love watching you with Leo and seeing how grief and joy can exist in the same heart. I love that you chose healing over hiding, that you built something real and meaningful from the pieces of your loss." Leo had stopped pretending to work on his homework and was watching this declaration with the satisfied expression of someone seeing a long-awaited conclusion finally unfold. "So," Mrs. Garcia said with matter-of-fact satisfaction, "when's the wedding?" Both adults laughed, the sound mixing relief and joy and anticipation. "Soon," Jessie said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Soon, but not rushed. We want to do this right." "We want Leo to help plan it," Arielle added, looking at the boy who'd become so precious to her. "And we want it to be here, in this place where we learned how to listen to each other." "In the shop?" Leo asked with delight. "In the shop," Jessie confirmed, "surrounded by motorcycles and music and all the things that helped us remember how to trust love again." As the afternoon wore on, filled with Mrs. Garcia's food and Leo's excited planning and the easy conversation of people who'd found their way home to each other, Jessie realized that the question wasn't whether broken things could be fixed. The question was whether they could be transformed into something more beautiful than they'd ever been in their original wholeness. The Ducati still gleamed in the corner where it had started this entire journey, but now it served as more than transportation. It had become a symbol of the truth that sometimes the most important destinations weren't places you traveled to, but people you learned to be present with. And as the desert evening settled around them, painting the shop in warm gold light, Jessie understood that he'd finally learned Maria's most important lesson, that love wasn't something you lost when someone died, but something you carried forward, something that grew larger when you had the courage to share it with new people who needed to remember that they weren't alone. The music would continue, different now but no less meaningful. The motorcycles would still need fixing, and Leo would still fill journals with his observations about the world's hidden voices. But now there would be someone else to share it with, someone who understood that the most revolutionary thing a person could do was choose connection over isolation, presence over performance, love over fear. In the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.